thank you for inviting me, and also thank you all for coming. I'm amazed on a beautiful fall day like today that you prefer to stay here and not walking in the woods. So anyhow, the topic that I'm supposed to talk is the Colorado End of Life Options Act, with the emphasis on medical aid in dying. So I'll start with a brief definition, and then I'll line out a little bit what we are going to cover. So in a nutshell, the Colorado End of Life Options Act authorized medical aid in dying, which allows terminally ill people to end their life with a prescribed medication. So that's in a nutshell. But I thought I'd also give you a little historical background, then go into the more details of what the law allows in the state of Colorado and what exactly medical aid in dying usually looks like and is, and then open up the call for questions and answers. Unless you have a pressing, if you have a pressing question, interrupt me. But otherwise, I recommend we'll wait till sort of the talk is almost over.
Start having a heart attack, I need to know now.
So, in 2016, Colorado voters with a large majority on the ballot for the passage of the Colorado End of Life Options Act, with a large majority, 65 or 65 majority. And it became effective at the end of 2016. It was signed into law by our governor. This law, or this act, was not the first one in the United States. There are 10 other states, plus the District of Columbia, that have similar End-of-Life Options Act, or some call it Death with Dignity Act or law, and there are a couple of other names, Medical Assistance of Dying Act. It has different names. Also, Canada has a similar law, and they call it Medical Assistance in Dying Law or Act, something like that. I want to mention is, for those of you who want to dig a little bit more into the details, that you find quite a bit of information on the internet. And I express some caution. Sometimes you find some people who are seriously opposed to this law and often dominate sort of certain websites, so you be aware of this. The law allows people to opt for the medication under very strict regulations, so and rules, and I will go over those. Let me first mention all the states that have those. It is California, Montana, New Jersey, Hawaii, Maine, the District of Columbia, and did I leave something out? New Mexico, and I think that's about it. So, and they're all very similar. They're all based on the first state that passed the Death with Dignity law, and that was Oregon. And people sort of pattern their laws after those. There are a number of organizations who are advocates of these laws, and one is the National Organization Compassion and Choices. of which I'm not a paid member. I'm just an advocate and volunteer for this. I want to stress this. So they did not organize this. So who qualifies? Now, some are listed here in this brochure, and no doctor is allowed to deviate from this. This is very important. The person has to be 18 years and older, in other words, to be of legal age, has to have a terminal illness, and to go into this, what that means, has to be mentally capable or competent, but the legal term used in Colorado is capable. We'll talk about this a little bit. Has to be a resident of Colorado. Now, all states have the residence that I mentioned, have the resident requirement, but there have been some lawsuits filed with success, and people now, for example, can go to Vermont, which I forgot, who do not live there. And there are several other states that are trying to also revoke the residence requirement, but not yet in Colorado, but there are people working on this. I want to mention this. Another state is actually Washington State. It allows people from surrounding states to, if they're eligible, to receive their medication in the state of Washington. Okay. The person has to, who is capable, legally capable, has to show that they are able to make a decision, a medical decision, and be able to communicate this to their doctor.
Who determines that?
Pardon me?
Who determines that? Is that the doctor?
Well, I'll get into this. The doctors. I also want to mention, at the current time, only MDs or DOs in the state of Colorado can prescribe the medication. But in the state of New Mexico, it was expanded to include advanced practice nurse practitioners and also physician assistants. And in some states, I think social workers with an advanced degree can do this, but not yet in Colorado. But this is also what people in Colorado try to achieve, is that because there are many areas in Colorado, in the rural areas, where there are no doctors. The patients would have to drive 100 miles to a doctor's office. However, often there's a nurse practitioner who sees people for routine medical care and is well aware of the needs and problems of the patients. So a resident of Colorado, it's not exactly specified how do you prove that you're a resident. Some people feel the easiest is of course the driver's license. However, many of the people are often old and haven't renewed their driver's license. So some people say you can show your lease or your home, your taxes that you paid, whatever. It's a little fuzzy. And it doesn't specify for how long you have been a resident in Colorado. That's not specified. So the fuzziness actually helps some people from out of state, some travel to Colorado and then quickly establish residency, sometimes going to a lawyer and saying, I live with my sister and I'm leasing a room from her and I want you to, certify this. So I want to mention this.
Has there been any consideration of internet associated?
Pardon?
Has there been any consideration of using the internet as a way that somebody can contact the doctor and certify this?
I don't think so. Not
Zoom or anything like that.
No.
Because you can have a consultation by Zoom.
I'll get to this in just a second.
Okay.
So the hallmark of the Act is that it is a voluntary decision of the patient who has a terminal illness. Voluntarily also refer not only to the patient, but also to the doctors that may prescribe the medication or have to provide a consultation, and the pharmacist who dispense the medication. So several parties have to really be told. And no doctor in Colorado is forced to participate. So for your information, there are several major healthcare systems, as you well know. The past when you had your personal doctor in a little private office is long over. Most doctors now work for big healthcare systems, and there are multiple in Colorado, but the biggest are probably University of Colorado Health, Denver Health, and Kaiser Permanente. All the other healthcare systems that are run by hospitals like St. Joseph Hospital, the Adventist hospitals and all, they do not participate. Now this year, the governor signed into law that the healthcare systems on their website write down what they support or not. That was fought like the devil. Yes, but they have to say, and how it's worded is not clear, and I don't know when the deadline is, but they have to make it clear to future patients that they participate or do not.
Just in this act, or for any kind of medical care?
Well, the other thing that is included is a reproductive health care for women. And there may be one more item I'm not familiar with exactly what it is.
So that means that if your general practitioner is connected with one of these systems,
yes,
you have to find first another doctor.
That is correct. Which brings up the question, any one of you who is lucky enough to have a personal doctor, or what used to be called by the insurance industry, the primary care doctor, maybe in a organization, like let's say, just as an example, at Kaiser Permanente, who may not participate, although overall the healthcare system will. So this is something the patient has to find out and then pursue this on their own. Okay.
Are there organizations that will help a person identify doctors?
There is no list on purpose that tells you which doctors provide medical aid in dying. It's done on purpose, but if you contact, for example, the Denver Health, they have a medical aid in dying department, and the social workers there and the nurses there and the nurse practitioners will help you depending on where you live and where you receive your medical care to find someone. Now, why is there no list? Like, given the fact that every person in the United States has what's called a handgun or an SR-15, many doctors, if their distance is as being a percent would, face the risk of being killed. That's one. But also, there's the fear that some doctors would be overrun by requests,
Sure.
I mean, there's a number of them. Yeah. So it takes a little bit of doing, and we'll talk about navigating the system later on. So what's a terminal illness? Well, most people think about that's obvious. Well, not necessarily. An illness that will kill a person defined within about 6 months or less. A disease that is not revocable. It cannot be changed no matter what medication might be available. And 6 months is what all these 10 states have in common. And you say, why 6 months? Well, they have to, legally define this. which is a problem for a physician. You may have all the info from a patient in front of you and know how the person's been sort of going downhill over time. But to say, well, Joe, you have 6 months. Well, people say, how horrible. If it maybe without the medication, you would have lived 8 months or a year, who knows. But you need to think about this, what would that have meant to the patient? No. So anyhow, the 6 months, to some degree, are an arbitrary legal definition of a terminal illness, and all 10 states and 11 jurisdictions have the same definition. It may change over time, who knows, okay?
So in other words, if I'm diagnosed with, say, Alzheimer's and I decide that, I don't want to go deeper into it, and I don't want to basically go through the long process of, my estate being drained, that would not qualify as a terminal illness.
That is correct, because Alzheimer's and other form of dementia, unless sort of at the terminal end, is not a terminal illness. As I don't know the exact statistics, but many people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer or similar dementia often live for years. Not uncommon, 5, 10, 15 years. So that brings up another question. We'll go into the decision making. You cannot write in your advanced medical directives, the directives where you say, I don't want to be resuscitated under these conditions, or I don't want to be put ever on a ventilator, I don't want to have a feeding tube, etc., etc. What is often a written document where you write down what you want and do not want. And I recommend that every one of you has a written document like this. And you can download the forms actually from the internet. You cannot write in the directive and say, in case I show signs of mental decline or cognitive impairment, I would like to receive the medication to end my life. This is not legal because it's not a terminal condition at that point. Okay? Yes?
Is there any push to relax this notion of 6 months terminal illness? I personally don't want to get anywhere close to that.
Yes.
And I would like to have the medical assistance way before then. Is there any push to change the legal requirements?
Not in the United States. In some European countries, there is a push to change the time frame, but not now. And one reason is there is still quite a bit of opposition to the whole idea of the End of Life Options Act and medical aid in dying. People feel that's the least important fact at the current time.
I would assume that the persistent vegetative state falls into all different categories.
That is correct.
Okay, so let's
So,
not talk about that.
People, for example, who have a severe disability, whether they were born with a congenital defect, a serious defect, or developed over the years a medical disability, that does not qualify. It has to be some kind of a new illness that has become terminal. And just an example, we'll go into the report from the health department later. The most common diagnosis for people who opted for medical aid in that is cancer. The second common one is some neurological degenerative disease, like ALS. So when people already have progressed quite a bit. Okay?
May put into the directive not mental capability, but if somebody is unable to communicate at that point.
Pardon me?
If somebody is unable to communicate, could they have put it in a directive?
Well, for example, you have to also think about modern technology. So people, for example, let's say who have a neurological disease and are on a ventilator, and then decide to have the ventilator discontinued. Well, they're often given nowadays an iPad or some kind of a computer, and if they can't, for example, write down you can speak in systems, you know, and it will go to that. So it doesn't say how the communication has to be done, okay? And also, with the recent COVID pandemic, what a visit to a doctor is, has changed. During the 2 years of the official pandemic, the consultations and visits with the doctors were done by Zoom or FaceTime, and that was accepted. Now, will this continue? We don't know. You know, we have to see. So, how does a patient go about, after having made the decision to opt or find some info about medical aid in dying? They are advised to visit with the attending physician. So what's an attending physician? Presumably a doctor who's sort of number one person in charge of the medical problems, let's call it. Also, that is all a little bit fuzzy, because you may be in a healthcare system where your personal doctor says, I don't want to participate, and refers you to his colleague in the same clinic or in another clinic. That can happen. So the patient goes to the doctor and says, I would like to have medical aid in dying, and has to make a verbal request. And it is very important that you make sure the doctor writes down in your records that you made that request, because in California, some of these religious operated hospitals do not wish to have that entered in the patient record. So you may have to, because that is important, because by law, the patient has to make 2 separate verbal requests and 1 written request from the attending physician or primary care doctor. 15 days apart, the doctor is obligated to advise the patient on all the things that may happen. What is involved? So what is involved? It's a prescription, a lethal prescription, a prescription for lethal medication that the patient has to be able to ingest himself or herself. It is not an injection and not an infusion. And it's not a gas exposure. I mean, it has to be ingested, which can be at times a problem.
I know somebody who had throat cancer and wasn't able to, he tried to commit suicide.
Well, the person who has throat cancer, I mean, these are issues. Often, especially in the more advanced, often have a feeding tube. And that's often why they get sick and tired of this. They don't want to continue with the feeding tube. You know, that's one reason.
Could I go back to this? You said that often if you have an attending physician,
yes,
and he says no, and you go, he directs you to somebody else.
Yes.
But does that person suddenly become your attending physician? Does that
yes.
work? That's okay.
Yes, that's okay. Especially in the healthcare system, most people, now you may not know this, but most of us are in some kind of a system, you know, and they have access to the same records. If you go to, as an example, to Kaiser Permanente, no matter what office you may go to in Boulder or Denver or where have you, if they all share the same electronic records. And in this day and age, almost all records are electronic records.
Okay. So I've done this several years ago and got the durable medical power of attorney and all those other things signed and the form wishes, et cetera, et cetera. But now my doctor is moving up, my former doctor is moving up into administration, and I have a new doctor, as I don't be seeing her again this week. But she has access then to all that information and all those things I signed, because they put them in the system so anybody can find them. And I had one of the assistants look to see if they could find them. The first one didn't know how to find them, the second one did. So, and there also, it turns out, a lot of those forms are in the patient handbook that they have laying in the room that you're in, but some of the aides and stuff don't know that. But some of them are right there, and you can have one of the aides be your witness if you want
Yeah,
to do
you
it right
have
then
to
and there.
be,
So do I have to talk to her verbally then, to the new lady verbally?
I
and
would
tell
say
her?
if there has been a change of doctors for whatever reason, to ask and say, I want you to look through my records and find my advance directives.
And then let me know what I have to do, if I have to do anything new.
Yes, and if there's something missing, then you just reiterate the demand.
The woman on the left has been asking for a long time.
So, in the case where you ask your physician about it and they say, I don't participate, go see Joe, does that count as your first request?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then
Okay,
you still
good.
need to write it in your record so that,
Yes.
because it could take weeks
Because
to get an appointment
Yes,
these days,
there
right?
should be an entry, something that says, it's, any time you go to a doctor, the doctor should write the primary reason why you come there. Maybe it's a checkup, maybe it's a new disease or something. There should be a request that simply says, Joe requires about medical aid in dying and requests a prescription for medication. Something simple, okay?
Should you do the same just for your directives? Should you ensure that each doctor...
Yes, because why is that important, that the date is different? Because the patient has to make this request twice. In Colorado, 15 days later. Okay? Why is that so? Why is there such a long delay? Well, to allow the patient to, with him, to think this over, to have second thoughts, which is not uncommon, but also to become more familiar with the statistics. Maybe he wants to know precisely a few more information and go on the internet or talk to another doctor who knows, okay?
But if somebody's in a state in the hospital, it's not so easy for them to go to a doctor.
Well, most hospitals, why would you be in a hospital and think about ending your life? It's sort of a contradictory. You would have to be discharged. Hospitals are there to treat you.
Yeah, but if you're in a state where you can't really get
Yes,
up
well,
and out.
that's why people need to make that decision fairly early in the disease. That's the whole important point. So why are there all these limitations, boundaries, and restrictions? To prevent abuse. And this is what the opposing parties are always talk about. They are concerned about coercion. The decision to make this should be completely voluntary. So, for example, when the patient talks to his attending physician, there should be no family member or other interested party there at the same time. And the physician is actually required to inquire about the research. Now, did anyone talk to you about this? Who proposed this? Where's your idea coming from? It's something that is by law, the physician has to do.
Roswitha.
Yes. I don't make proposals. So, and then, why 2 weeks? Again, this goes back to the initial death with dignity laws in Oregon. Now, in some states, this has already been shortened because what has happened often is people became more and more ill and then died before the 2 weeks were up. But then, according to people who observed this, they're absolutely miserable. So there are some states that shortened the time, and I think one is California, to 48 hours, and some to seven days instead of 14, and so forth. So after the initial visit to the attending or primary care doctor, the patient needs to see a consultant. And this is usually a physician. In Colorado, it is a physician. In some states, it can be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or also some person who is an expert in mental health issues. And the job of this consultant is several. One is to confirm the diagnosis and the terminal illness. So that means usually he needs he or she access to the records, which takes some time, which also points out that probably the patient needs to probably need some help to make sure the records are promptly transferred, nowadays electronic records often, to the consulting physician. So after the consulting physician agrees with three things: yes, the patient has a terminal illness, he is capable of making a decision that pertains to his health care, and there shows no sign that he was talked into this or coerced by any party, whoever that party is. Then after this consultation, the patient needs to go back either online or in person to the initial physician and ask once more for the prescription. And then if 15 days have passed, the doctor can write the prescription and hand it to the patient. Or nowadays, many prescriptions are electronically submitted to the pharmacy. Okay.
So if you don't have insurance and you don't have a lot of money, this doesn't work at all.
Well, I can't really, that's not really my issue about mainly the money. So just an idea. One of the pharmacies that have been involved for the past 7 years in dispensing the medication, we'll go into this what it is on the campus of Denver Health. You know where that is? It's a huge medical campus right pretty much in the center between Spear and West 6th Avenue. There's a big pharmacy on campus. And the cost approximately is $400. And if you're a Medicare patient, Medicare will not pay for this. However, there are also some compassionate people. If they find out there is a patient who really needs and wants medical aid in time, there are some people who donate money in various funds and help the patient pay for the medication. Okay. So $400 approximately.
For the whole process?
For the medication.
Just for the medication?
That is correct.
It's not the
No,
consultant,
your doctor's visits, I can't tell you how much a doctor charges, it varies,
Right. So you're probably talking about a couple thousand.
I don't know, it depends. If you, for example, if you go to Kaiser and you see your primary care physician, it's part of your plan, and many plans have no copay for a doctor's visit. Some do, some don't.
If you're in a plan. But if you don't have insurance,
you're out of luck, but you're out of luck in everything in life. It's not just this particular medical aspect.
Can you pay for that medication on a credit card?
I presume. I don't know. It probably depends on the pharmacy, and the pharmacy can charge more. I have no idea. I know just about this one particular pharmacy.
Is the pharmacy allowed to not supply the medication that they don't agree to?
Again, I go back, it's a voluntary decision. Every pharmacy has the right not to participate. And the big pharmacy chains like Walgreens, CVS and all, they already have announced that they participate.
They will.
They will not.
They will not.
And one of the reasons they give is because these are national chains. Their system does not allow to say we only do this in Colorado, but we can't do this in Nebraska, or we can't do this in Kentucky or whatever. So that's one of the reasons. So it has to usually be some kind of an independent pharmacy or the pharmacy at these three systems that I mentioned.
I had a friend who went to get the medications for her mom, and the individual pharmacist said for his own personal reasons he was not going to do that.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, okay. I had a friend whose mom was requesting these, and so she went to get the medicines from a pharmacist, and the pharmacist said that my individual preference is that I will not do
Yes.
this.
Well, it helps to inquire ahead of time. I mean, you don't wait till you have the prescription in your hand, you walk over to the pharmacy to look, and they say, no, Walgreens doesn't dispense those, you know. A telephone call helps. Okay.
So it sounded the NRA in the end.
So it's, you know, and this issue with the pharmacy, the number of pharmacies is apparently limited in Colorado. And some people in the rural areas to get any prescription sometimes have to drive 100 miles or more to get to a pharmacy. This is a real issue for rural Colorado. You know, we are outside of the Front Range, we are a rural state, you know, so it's a problem. You also have a problem finding a doctor, you know. So.
Or two doctors.
Right. Yes.
Well.
So, in just one of the states, either Oregon or Washington, now allows also the prescription, the medication to be mailed, because that's the same issue with driving and finding but in Colorado, you have to pick it up. The patient doesn't have to be picked up. It can be a family member or friend or whatever. There's no rules about this. Who will pick up the medication? Okay. So I also want to mention is some laws that pertain to the right of the patient. Now the patient, let's say Joe, the patient, has had his 2 doctor's visits and has gotten the prescription. The prescription the request for the prescription has to be in writing, the second, in addition to the verbal request, and be signed by 2 witnesses. Yes, thank you, lawyers. But this is also done all for safety reasons to prevent abuse. One of the witnesses cannot be a family member and also cannot be a person who might inherit the person's
short-sighted.
Yes. Well, this is again to prevent abuse, because people may sort of very gently coerce a person in there. And it says, think about your grandchildren. Who knows what people will say. I think these are bad. These restrictions and regulations are all to some degree to prevent abuse, coercion, and I think mounting opposition from people who just object to the whole idea of medical aid in dying. Okay. So let's go about the medication. So what is actually the medication? It is a compound, as we call it, of medications in powder form. And there are, at the current time, there are 5 different medications in there. And I don't have the list, that doesn't matter, because it's all flux, it changes. There are sedatives, there's a barbiturate in there, there's something, an anti-anxiety medicine and all. They're all together are put in one bottle as a powder. And then prior to taking it, the patient has to, not the patient, someone has to mix up this powder in the bottle, and then the patient has to ingest this within a short period of time. It can be offered through a straw. Usually it's mixed with supposedly the concoction, excuse my term, tastes bad. And people recommend you camouflage it with apple juice or with some kind of a drink that people like, but not a fizz drink, nothing bubbly, okay, because that may cause people to burp out the medicine.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, right before the ingestion of the medication, the patient 1 hour before is giving some other medication to calm down the stomach so that they not hopefully throw up the medicine, which would be a disaster. Okay. Now the patient can change his or her mind at any time. Just because you got the prescription, you paid your dear money for it, and then you decide, no, that's not what I want to go through, and that is perfectly fine. And then the medication that is not used has to be safely, I think, returned or quote disposed of. And that is a little bit vague. I think the best would be just to return it to the pharmacy.
With getting it and not using it preempts you from getting it a second time. Is there some rule in that?
But you're already dead.
No.
I love it.
You got it the first time, you changed your mind. Will that?
You can change your mind at any
I
time.
understand,
Yes.
but will, from the medical side, will that stop you from saying in a future time, no, actually, I want to go now? Can I get the medication the second time? Or if you change your mind, does that create a block?
Well, or how long of a shelf life?
I do not know. I have never seen a report.
Keep it in the kitchen.
I'm pretty sure the issue has come up. But I'm not aware of any of those events, and I don't have any answer.
It'd be interesting to know if you have to go through the whole process again.
Yeah, to find out.
This is such an unusual, I would say, situation.
I think it's more common than you think.
How long can you hold on to that medicine without using it once you've got it?
Once you have mixed it up with water.
No, not mixed it,
The
you've obtained it.
Till you decide to either take it or not take it.
So I could sit on it for 3 months?
Correct, yes.
So what's the resale value?
In other words, when the doctor writes the prescription, there is no regulation that says, now you must take it within the next 4 weeks or the next 3 months or whatever.
So there's no time limit?
So, for example, some people may, as soon as they hear about their terminal diagnosis, they may then go to the doctor and say, I would like to opt for medical aid in dying, and go through the 14 to the 15-day waiting period, get the prescription, and then they'll linger on for whatever reason, decide not to proceed, and the medicine sits there. And there are also regulations that the patient has to make sure it's not taken by someone else. So, for example, if you expect grandchildren to be visited, make sure they don't have access to this, just as an example, or someone else in the family, someone who may be suicidal, you know. So
it's not legally mandatory to return it if you decide to basically hold on to it for a little while.
Usually there's some nurses involved, so I want to quickly mention that is not quite sure. How are you supposed to, if it wasn't taken? I would have to dig into the Colorado End of Life Act is a 40-plus document, 40-page document. I have to look up exactly what it says, or talk to a nurse who's in charge of some of this things.
Don't put next to that document online on the webpage someplace.
Yes, and not option X, yes. Yeah, you find many, and I might actually show you one that I have on my computer. So we talked about this. So it's recommended actually a number of things. Oh, there's one more regulation. You're supposed to not take the medication to end your life in a public place. As an example,
The library.
not the library, yes, or go to a park. I'm not quite sure how public is perhaps. It's also recommended that there be another person, and that is another problem. A person who helps you, for example, the patient may be too weak to even shake up the bottle with the liquid in there, and maybe too weak to hold the cup. And there's nothing against it. The person can be a helper, it can be a family member or friend or nurse or someone who holds the cup and puts the straw in the mouth or helps tilt the cup, whatever may be necessary. There's nothing about it that is wrong.
So, because in some places, assisting suicide is
Yes, I'm glad you bring this up. So the word suicide, the word suicide has absolutely no place in there. And this is even determined by law. When the patient after the patient has taken the medical aid in dying, what goes into the death certificate? The original terminal disease. There is no mentioning that the patient took the medication. That's done on purpose.
Do you have to report that they did?
Pardon me?
Do you have to report that
Oh,
somebody
I get to the report.
medication?
Yeah, I get to the report. There are a number of legal things. So this is important. So what terms are considered to be acceptable? You can call it medical aid in dying. It's also called assistant dying, medically assisted dying, physician assistant dying, assistant death. For example, I read in a book by Bishop Tutu, Desmond Tutu from South Africa. He liked the term assistant death, and he had no objection to this development. But suicide is not to be used, and that's important because all the religious organizations and healthcare systems that oppose the legal medical aid in dying will repeatedly refer to the word suicide. And that is to be about. And those of us who actually have witnessed people trying to commit suicide or were, quote, successful in dying with suicide, no, there is an essential difference. And people have pointed this out. Usually a person with who commits suicide usually is a violent death, usually with a gun, often done by people who have a record of mental health illness. People often do it alone. They don't contact the physician to get medication. Okay, and this is something the physician also has to evaluate. If this patient, when making a decision, the patient is capable of making the decision, are there signs that the patient is severely depressed or suffers from some kind of a mental illness that clouds his decision-making capabilities? You know, if a patient, for example, says, "Doc, I've gone through 4 rounds of chemotherapy, and the last time I went, my doctor informed me it's no longer effective. So for me, the time has come to consider medical aid in dying." This kind of conversations point out that the patient has rational thinking. Okay, you know, needless to say, many people are, let's say, somewhat depressed when they face a terminal illness. That's not uncommon. But does that cloud their decision-making capability? That's 2 different things. And that's what the second consultant is for. They have to evaluate this.
It seems that there'd be a real risk for anybody assisting them if there were found afterwards that there was any flaw in the process that led to the point of them getting the. I mean, it suddenly becomes suicide if they don't have all the documentation, all the.
But there is documentation. So we would want the written request for the medication that I'll get now into the report that the first physician, the attending physician, has to file with the Colorado Health Department. And that's pretty much in charge of all the documentation. With the date and also including the request, the written request signed by 2 witnesses. That has to be filed with the Colorado Health Department within a specified time. Okay, and then the consultant, the second physician, who agrees with the terminal diagnosis and agrees that the patient is capable, medically capable of making decisions in his health care, also is a written report that has to be filed with the Colorado Health Department. And last, the pharmacist has to sign to file a report that the prescription was filled and given out and dispensed on such days. So all these they're specialized forms. Other forms were developed by the Colorado Health Department.
But does somebody in the patient's, because the patient's gonna be dead at that point, but does somebody, you know, if there's a nurse or there's a family member or something, do they have to tell, like, the coroner or whoever comes when you die, that the patient took that medicine?
It is better not to mention anything. The point is, they have a terminal illness.
Right.
And to say, this is a cancer patient, he's been going to the Colorado Cancer Center for the past 5 years, and it finally took his life.
So
That's it. But it's also recommended, not mandatory, that people enrolled in the terminal stage of the disease in something like hospice, because the hospice people know also how to deal with people who die at home. It sounds horrible. It's routine almost. They have a person who goes and signs a nurse who signs the death certificate, for example, and notify the appropriate authorities and all, know how to quote handle this. Because if you die, I don't know about Boulder, but in Denver, probably it's the same in many counties. If you die at home, and it's not quite clear what you died for, the coroner is called on the scene, and he or she will determine whether an autopsy is indicated or necessary, But if the hospice people come and say, well, he died from his cancer, as an example, then that usually is not necessary. Okay. The last is, do not call 911.
Yeah.
And someone will come and do this.
So, what if you'd rather not use the legislated means of dying? There are.
Give an example.
Apparently the simplest and quietest way to die is just to breathe pure nitrogen for a few years.
What's your opinion on the peaceful pill and Milex is, I think, what Ed's trying to say.
Well,
Peaceful.
There's a book called The Peaceful Pill out of Australia with Nietzsche, who...
Well, if it's not dispensed by a legal physician under these legal requirements, then it will be probably considered to be a suicide. If you take some kind of a poison, whether it's a pill from Australia or something else, or you inhale helium, for example, then it's not medical aid in dying. That's what this whole legality is all about.
And it's so cumbersome, there's gonna be an awful lot of people.
Yes,
that
it
say,
is
"Hell,
cumbersome,
I'm not
and
gonna
it's
fool with that."
recommended,
That should be communicated to those who are writing these laws.
And, for example, my mom...
How did this all come about? When you try, you know this better than anyone, when you try to pass a law, the word is compromise. You have so many people who object to medical aid in dying. Although in Colorado, it's the majority who favor it. Still, you have to compromise and say, well, we build in these requirements. We build in this prevention of abuse and coercion, etc. That's how it comes about. Okay. Now, maybe with time it will ease up a little bit. As I said, the time frame is changing in some states. In some states, the nurse practitioner can do this nowadays. So I think with time, and once people gain more experience, it might change. But it has to come through the legislature. People have to request it. Okay.
So do you suggest that, to have hospice be a part of the process?
Pardon me?
To have hospice be a part of the process?
No. Hospice, I cannot speak for all hospices, by and large, does not participate. And when you think about this, that would be a conflict of interest. They will help you, for example, there's the biggest hospice in Denver, it's called Denver Hospice. And I know a family friend of ours who took medical aid in dying. He just told the hospice nurse, and said, I'm interested in finding out something about medical aid and done. She said, you call this number and you'll be talking to someone who will help you figuring this all out.
But it would make the difference between whether the coroner and autopsy, wouldn't it? If you have, if hospice acknowledges that it was a death by cancer.
So if the patient has been officially in hospice, but gets the medical aid in dying medication from a different provider, not from the hospice doctors. Okay, that's the point, not from a nurse at hospice. Then when the patient dies, they call the hospital and says he died this afternoon, and the hospice nurse from there comes by and declares, does whatever is required to certify that someone is actually dead. People have all sorts of concerns. So yes.
So, are we open to questions at this point, or do you have more presentation?
Yes, let me go to one more thing about the report. So, by law, in addition to all these requirements that we discussed, the law requires that the Colorado Health Department files annually a statistical report. How many people got a prescription written and what kind of disease did that die from? What was that terminal disease? And the one that is available pertains to 2022, and I might give you some numbers. Now, it's not open to the public. If your neighbor dies, you cannot go up to Colorado Health Department and say, I'm kind of curious.
Was the number 200?
Did he take that compound? No. It's a statistical aggregate. It will just say how many people got a prescription. It does not say, did the patient take the medicine? They don't have that. No one is legally required to say he got the prescription, but he never took it. That is not reported to the health department.
Sorry, what about people who ask for the medication and get denied? Do they track that?
I don't think so. They track who got actually the prescription and picked it up, or it was picked up at the pharmacy. That's what's tracked. And what's tracked are a number of demographics, like the age of the patient, their diseases, their underlying disease, their educational level, and also the trend over the years. So we are today in the 7th year.
Give us some numbers so we have some idea.
Okay, this is called the data summary. And anyone who is particularly interested, I have another copy. So the trend has been upwards from 2017, the first year the law was in effect, to 2020. There's been a steady incline, but it's not an epidemic. And people were, the opposing people felt people will all come from other states and then claim residency here and then go ahead. Nothing of this has occurred. So the total number of patients prescribed aiding dying medication in 2022 were 316. Okay. So it's not a huge number.
Do you have any idea what the suicide number for that year is?
You mean people who truly took suicide? This is not suicide.
Yeah, I understand that. But how many people took the alternative? Do you have any idea?
No, I have no idea. But I will make some comments about why I'm personally also interested in this advocacy. And here are the most common diseases. Most are cancers or malignant diseases, as I call lung cancer, breast cancer, pancreas, colon, kidney, etc., multiple myeloma, etc., and so forth. The most common one is still lung cancer. I was quite shocked to see
Yeah.
how common this still is, yes. Okay. Then the next category is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and other ALS and other what we call neurological degenerative diseases. There are several other diseases where people become completely paralyzed or partially paralyzed, etc. And those were, and that also surprised me.
Well, the lung, but I mean, if you think of it, if you think of it, the people who were dying of lung cancer were mostly in the 50s and 60s. I mean, they're older now, and so that was the time when most people, a lot of people.
No, people now die later because they are quote effective medication. You know, so it's not uncommon that people survive 5 or more years with lung cancer. You know, after they've tried several times of chemotherapy.
We have a number for that question.
1,384.
Suicide.
22.
Where did that from?
So like 4 or 5 times the number of people who've taken
Right.
Now,
legal way out.
Department of Health.
so we may also now open this discussion. So why, for example, am I interested in this? I'm not a participating physician. I no longer am old and no longer have a medical practice and no longer have my license renewed, but I'm still deeply involved in the movement. Basically, is the whole idea about medical aid in dying is to reduce and end suffering. That's amen. And this is something where the opposing people come in. And they say, well, no one has to suffer anymore. We have wonderful pain medication. You know, they'll refer to fentanyl patches and opioids of various kinds. And often the answer is pain is not the issue. As a matter of fact, when people were asked and gave a report why they selected this, the most common one is that people feel their suffering is a mental issue, is a psychological issue.
Wow.
They no longer feel, if they're bedridden, the disease progresses. Every day is a little bit more miserable than the previous one. Every day they lose one more function they had before. They feel there is no purpose in life. And the lack of purpose to continue life for many people is painful and is suffering. I think the most important thing is that we do not define suffering equals pain. The other things people have mentioned what suffering is and painful is to watch. You become sort of the focus. You're bedridden at home. A nurse comes in and helps you with all sorts of things. The family gets involved, and everyone's moping around and in tears. And to watch this, and to watch someone going downhill and become more dependent on others and feeling miserable, to watch it as the dying patient is reported to be very painful. So the issue is not pain control. The issue is suffering. Whatever suffering is a subjective concept, is a subjective feeling. And we cannot argue with this. All right, I'll open this up. Any questions, comments? Let me ask you, has anyone ever witnessed or even peripherally be involved in someone who took medical aid in dying in an extended family? Okay. So I may relate one case. I have been peripherally involved just as one of the witnesses, since I was not a family member, to co-sign the written request for the medication. This person was a professional person with a degree in physiology, not a physician, but had an advanced PhD in physiology.
Knows too much.
He was maybe 78 or 79, I forgot the exact age. And he was diagnosed with a very strange form of lung cancer. And we received a consultation at the University of Colorado and another consultation at National Jewish Hospital, which is considered to be one of the leading respiratory diseases. And he opted for chemotherapy, which he took for a year, and then it stopped working. Then he opted for some immunotherapy, which is sort of the latest, for about a year. And the doctor told him that there would come a time when that would stop working, and it did after roughly 10 some months or so. And then he enrolled in hospice when things gone downhill. And then he inquired about medical aid in dying, and after he got the prescription, I think about 4 months later, he decided to take the medicine. And I witnessed his death, and to me, I've seen also death scenes in the hospital in years past. To me, this was the most peaceful situation I can imagine, because everyone prepared, the wife told the time, and some other people knew the time this would happen, so there was no agony going around.
Wow.
So after he had gone, his wife called me and said she needed to relate something to her that really bothered her a great deal. The day before he decided to end his life, he said to her, I want you to come to my study and pick something up from the bookshelf, on top of the bookshelf. And he said, okay. So she took a box and said, please open it. And inside was a handgun. And she was absolutely shocked. She said, you mean you had initially decided to kill yourself with a gun? He said, yes, I did. When I heard about the diagnosis and I found out that all the medications have their limits, I decided that's what to do. So thank goodness he did not proceed with it. And
Right, you didn't need to.
yes. And in my question, I don't know what yours is, we have, Colorado has a very high number of suicides. What did you say, 1,000?
1,384, I believe, was the number CDC had.
And I personally wonder how many of these 1,000 plus people actually were informed by their physicians that they had a dreadful illness, whatever it was, a terminal illness, and then decided that's not what I want to endure. We don't know. There was a time where the CDC actually investigated this question, how many people who commit suicide have some kind of an illness, but that was not funded by the Republicans at the time, and I think it's dead on arrival, any proposal to do this again. Yes.
In your experience, is the lobby of the people who are putting these restrictions on to avoid abuse and misuse of the kinds of things, is most of that, in your experience, religious-based?
It's almost exclusively religiously motivated. Okay. One big opposition, and they're very open about it, is the Catholic Church. But also many, many different evangelical churches oppose it, just on principle.
I was in Europe for a long time. In Europe, of course, the attitude is different.
There's no such uniform thing in Europe.
No,
every country, and only a few countries in Western Europe have something similar to medical aid in dying.
Yes, but they're a little bit more tolerant about suicide.
Yeah, well, all of Western Europe is much more secular. I mean, less than 5% of people go to any kind of service, religious service. So.
Is this an appropriate website?
Yes. No, this is one of the watch out.
That's why I was asking.
It was the bogus website pretending to.
Well, I will not call it bogus, but the science.
So
There's
you
one
would go
from
to
the University
compassionate
of
choices.
Colorado Health Sciences, Colorado University Health, and you'll find the whole,
Colorado University Health.
yeah. And you can't find information about all the various things.
Well, I was looking for the 40-page document. I love to read fine print. I
That's
read that, all of that before I click that box on the bottom of web pages. I just love that fine print.
I would recommend to not pursue this. I've never seen that document on the internet. I'm pretty sure you can get it from the Colorado legislature.
I'm not so sure, and I wouldn't, I'm sort of depressed that I would have to.
Colorado
Isn't
Revised
it the Colorado Revised Statute?
Yeah, the RS.
Oh, it's passed, so it's in the.
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah, 2016, yeah, that's, thank,
So before the ballot was passed, maybe a little bit about the background. A year or two before the ballot was passed, there was actually a legislative initiative to have the whole legislature pass the law. And that failed in committee. And I was one of the people who actually went there because it was open to testimony. That was the biggest overflow of the Capitol ever recorded. I mean, sort of thousands of people tried to sign up, and give testimony. We all were stuck in some overflow for hours. And you were given 4.5 minutes to give your testimony. And there were two separate committees, one by the House and one by the Senate. And they lasted till about 11 o'clock in the evening. I think I was finally allowed to give my 4-minute testimony at about 10:30 in the evening, after I had signed up at 9 in the morning.
Were most of the people who came pro or against?
Well, you signed in, there was a list, two lists,
yeah.
4 against.
And how did it, what was the balance?
It didn't matter because what we found out later on, the Senate, that did not pass, neither chamber. What we did learn at the time, in the Senate, the Republicans were the majority in the Senate at that time. And they had decided, they had a meeting the night before, and they already decided to vote against it. So, and I've never seen numbers where they actually counted and said so many for, so many against. I'm not even quite sure that it's legally required. So, but anyhow, that's why the ballots then came about. Okay.
So I have, I'm sorry.
Any questions, comments, personal experience? Yes.
So the only argument that I've seen against this procedure that seems compelling to me is the economic argument that some of the anti-people say that people might choose this for economic reasons, and that's not a good enough reason. That depends on who owns you, but when I see that argument, that's the only thing I've ever seen that makes sense to that people may choose this because of economics, not because of other reasons, that it sounds like the guardrails and the cross-checking would prevent the economic choice.
But they have a terminal illness.
What economics? To pay for it done or
Oh, that's a fair question. So
Insurance.
So if I may address that, the economics would be if a person is real broke and they have been broke a long time, that compared to a person like the people in this room who have reasonable amounts of money most of the time, that person might choose to end their life simply, money would add into it too much.
They couldn't choose this because they didn't have money. Is that my understanding?
Not quite.
But they would choose it because they don't have money?
Yes, they're super depressed for too long because they don't have money. And, that
address
argument.
this, because this issue is actually brought up in the first visit. The doctor may say, is there a financial reason you are opting to hasten your death is one term that is being used.
Okay.
And the patient may say, yes, that's one reason. I know I'm going to die in 6 months, and I consider the medical care during that time is just a waste of expense. I would like that money rather to go to my grandchildren for their education, or to my wife so she can live a better life and what have you. There's nothing against this.
Would that be accepted?
Pardon?
Would that be acceptable?
If you have a terminal illness, yes.
Yes, but that's still.
I mean, it's painful. The patient will say, it's painful for me to use up the money that I think should go to someone else in the family.
Okay.
It's just, most people don't have just one reason. Most people have several reasons they want to have medical aid done.
So then that argument that I hear is not valid to me anymore. So, yeah, I can counter that argument.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah. It's suffering. The patient with the terminal will suffer from the fact that he's using up for his medical care tons of money. And believe me, it costs a lot of money nowadays to have received medical care. The people who come and look after you, the various drugs and what have you, and say, I'd rather shorten my death. I know I'm going to die within this time. I'd rather shorten it. And that is one consideration. You know, it shouldn't be number one that you go in and say, I have $1 million in the account. I want that to go to my grandchildren.
This is all based on having a terminal illness.
Yes.
Right. In other words, if I become disabled to a point where I feel I have lost purpose in life or anything like that, this would not apply whatsoever.
No, that we specified it. A disability, either congenital or acquired, is not a valid cause for medical aid in dying. Okay? That is very special. And that was one opposition. All the people with disabilities, there's an organization that helps people to get better laws and regulations and help and so forth. They object to, incidentally, to this whole idea of dignity, death with dignity. And I'm someone who does not particularly like the term, because I think it is too narrow. But when you call this, so what is indignity? So some people were very specific. They said, I've lived an independent life. I was a rancher and a farmer for 70 years. I supported my family, and now I'm bedridden and get diapered every night. Someone takes me to the toilet. I don't want this. That is indignity. And the people with a disability who've been born like this, they say, what's the big deal? I'm diapered every day since age 1.
Well.
So, yes.
I'd like to ask an adjunct question to Robert. And on the practical side of the finances, first off, I'm assuming, I thought what he was going after was the idea that insurance might be involved, and that's nullified if it's suicide, and that this might get you through that insurance. But let me ask a more practical question on that, which is, why would somebody choose this instead of buying the book, The Peaceful Pill, that goes into what I think Ed said with nitrogen? And helium actually works better, I think, but nitrogen is a natural particle that doesn't distinguish itself in a postmortem, so that you can go in and say, No, it was just an asteroid. I got struck by an asteroid. It has
Access.
nothing to do with that nitrogen I have at home.
Access,
How,
access to nitrogen.
could you yell at me?
Access to hydrogen, access to,
I'm sorry, nitrogen.
or nitrogen.
But you can buy those at welding supplies. It's pretty
Yeah.
easy, and they go into that in the book, The Peaceful Pill, and that was my question of, why would you tolerate this enormous invasive bureaucracy if you have these other options you could buy for a $50 book?
Two things. Most people don't know about that Australian quote pill.
Pentobarbital is what, it's pentobarbital, but they call it pentobarbital.
And
And they actually recommend helium and
if
nitrogen.
the person with the terminal illness has a life insurance, suicide is excluded.
No, it isn't.
By definition, this is suicide, what you're talking about.
Right.
This is medical aiding dying. What kills the person is the disease.
In the United States, as far as I know, in the United States, there is a law in life insurance that after the first 2 years of the policy, there is no out for the insurance company. Doesn't matter if it's suicide, doesn't matter how you die. In Europe, it's very different. I know in England, it's brutal. But in the States, if the policy is more than 2 years old, then it's an unqualified policy.
Has that been substantiated, Harvey? Has that gone into the courts?
That's, as far as I know, that's existed for years and years.
I cannot talk about health, life insurance. I'm not a life insurance. I can only say the people who have died with the help of medical aiding dying are on the death certificate labeled as having died from their underlying terminal illness, which in my opinion, that's what kills them. Otherwise, why would they have gone to the trouble? And then also, although the exit, it's very hurting some, but there are people in the state of Colorado who will help you navigate the system. You call for example, the Kaiser Permanente has a department.
Wow.
There's a doctors and nurses and a social worker that will all tell you how does this whole system run. If you call Denver Health, there's a Department of Medical Aiding done. They will tell you how to navigate the system. No. This is why it is so important to spread the information.
But this is also, there's something underlying here that I somehow object to, and that is that for me, suicide, given certain situations, is honorable. It's not dishonorable, it's not shameful, it's not embarrassing. It's actually, you're in a situation where you, as a human being, make a positive decision about your existence, and you take things back from that direction. And what you're presenting, I mean, I don't mean this pejoratively. What you're presenting is that it is nicer, it is more respectable to die of the illness that you had that caused this. And I'm saying, no, it's actually more respectable to be a responsible human being and decide about your life. So that I personally would prefer that if I decided to commit suicide, that even on my death certificate, it says suicide.
Well,
So how do we vote for you, Harvey?
but that's not what the general public usually thinks. There's a quote, a stigma with suicide. People I tell you, I heard a comment from a Jewish person who said to me, that is a wimp if you take your own life. So that's one opinion. Another one is, until not too long ago, if you were a Catholic and you committed suicide, they refused to even give you a funeral service. I mean, the stigma is incredible.
But it's also the family that's left behind too.
Sorry?
It's traumatic grief. If somebody, I mean, it's consideration.
Well, if you're doing it for a reason and you're not.
Absolutely, no, I understand that, but I'm saying that the suicide is typically, it can result in traumatic grief for a family if they don't understand or if they haven't.
Well, but they can be informed. They can be, you know, I mean, they can be informed by the person who's about.
Well, I'm not
I think
disagreeing.
there was a writer years ago who he'd gone blind and he ended his life. And I remember thinking, this is decades ago. And I remember thinking about that at some length and thinking, actually, this is one of our freedoms as human beings.
Right.
And to take that act as a positive act is not disreputable or.
No, I think your thoughts are shared by thousands of people in the American West. We have the highest, quote, suicide rate that people had it. And most, I think the people at the East Coast, at least at the East Coast, have a different attitude about life and taking your own life, whether you call it suicide or medical aiding dying end. Is they come to a point where they said, I had it, it's not worth it to live on, and take their lives. And it's not written up in the newspapers that, you know, it's not published, but I think we don't know the number of these people. All we know, the people that you mentioned, the 1,000 plus, the bulk of people probably have medical depression, clinical depression.
I just wanted to mention the Harvey with your comment that there's another meetup group in South Denver that's on the other side of the world for me, so I won't go, but I posed the question in a comment and got a positive response that they would be willing to discuss in a debate the merits of who owns what of your mortality. And it might encompass some of your questions.
I would like to comment. I agree with the notion that the suicide has a bad reputation, and almost all of that derives from the same thing that is opposing this here, and that's from religion. Those are religious-based, that you should hold on to life as long as possible, regardless of conditions. I think that's an unethical position myself.
So I might point out to you, there are movements in some European countries. I think one is France, where people even raise the question that, do you have to have a terminal illness in order to qualify for medical aid dying? And they argue, if I have it up to here for whatever reason, I should go to my doctor and ask for medication.
Yeah, I think I own my own life. I don't give anyone
Many people share
the right
that.
to tell me.
But that's not the political reality. The political reality
It is, but I'm arguing against it. That's what I'm saying.
That's okay. The reality is that this country, the policy is determined by many religious people.
We love New York.
To me, it's the same as the pro-choice movement.
Yep.
You're making a decision about your own life.
Yes.
And their religion should have nothing to do with it.
I agree.
Asking questions. Thank you, Dr. Moering, for the presentation.
A number of books written about what is called end-of-life care. That's a big issue in the medical field it's not necessarily related with medical aid dying. And one book became a bestseller a number of years ago by Arthur Gawande. You might have heard about The Immortal. Okay. This is about recommending to people that we all need to write and discuss with our loved ones what should happen when you get ill and become.
My husband committed suicide, and I knew 15 years before. She told me that she always told me that is the way he would end his life, and he did.
Yeah, that's what I tell my.
And was that okay for you in the end? Were you able to accept that?
Yes.
Okay.
Please
The book
introduce
that I
these.
really recommend, I'll pass it around, is written by Barbara Coolsley, who was the president of the Death with Dignity Association, or Compassion and Trust, I forgot exactly. And it's very practical. What are the things you need to think about to discuss with your family and loved ones, and what are the actual steps you take to make sure your end of life is the way you are comfortable with, if that's what you want, that you die at your terms, not at what other organization, whether it's the American Medical Association or whoever, or certain churches, try to tell you. Okay, that's important. I'll pass that around. And there's another, this new edition actually that came out. Very practical.